I want to talk to you about the most important, perhaps I want to say the only lesson from comparative studies in education. And when I say the most important lesson, it's this. We study groups of people, groups of children in school, groups of adults, families. All the time we're talking about groups of people. And the most important lesson when thinking about groups is that intragroup variation within a group of people, is always greater than the variation between groups. Intragroup bigger than intergroup. Intragroup, the group variation within a group, is always bigger than the variation between groups. Let me spell that out in detail. If we take a group of people, any characteristic that they have is likely to follow more or less a normal distribution. Let's take a characteristic of all male people in the population. This might be their maths score, it might be their height, but most people will be in the middle. The largest numbers of people will be somewhere in the middle, near the mean. Some people will be having very high values, some people having very low values. And the spread from very low to very high is huge. I mean, if the standard deviation of that distribution is, let's say, this much, then 96% of people will fall within 3 times on either side, and only something like 4% of the people will be in these extremes. Only a small percentage will be in those extremes, but the spread is quite large. Now let's suppose, make it more concrete, let's make it IQ of people. Their IQ, for example, the mean would be 100, and the standard deviation would be 15, so that would be 85, 70, 55, 115, 130, 145. And 96% of people have an IQ between 55 and 145. A typical distribution of people for IQ, for example, mean of 100, standard deviation of 15. Let's talk about math scores, for example. Let's suppose that we give all the males in the population a maths test, and the scores range between an average of 50 and going from 20 up to 80 male score on that range. Now let's suppose we give the same maths test to females, and the females typically might do a bit better than males on the maths test. And look, what we're seeing here now is very similar pattern, but females scoring on average, the average score for females is about 10 points more than for males. This is the difference between the mean for males and the mean for females. And it's small compared with the spread of the population. You can see that if we pick out a particular score for a female, here's a score, that female is below average for a female, but she's doing worse than, although on average females are doing better than males, that female is doing worse than a very large majority of males. Although we know that on average, and typically we know very accurately because, for example, in the United Kingdom, every boy and every girl takes a standardised maths test at the age of 16. We know that the scores are very, very similar, but girls score on average slightly more than boys do. The performance is better, but that doesn't tell us, if we picked out a boy and a girl at random, that the girl is definitely going to be better at maths than the boy. We are sure that within very small limits, we know the scores of girls are better than the scores of boys because we test everybody. We have huge numbers. The samples are huge, so we know very accurately what the mean and the standard deviation of the distribution is. The difference between the boys and the girls in maths tests is very small. It's less than the difference between people born in January and people born in July. It's tiny, but we know it with great certainty. But when we pick out individuals, we pick out an individual male, we pick out an individual female, we know very little about their math scores from the fact that they're male or they're female, because the spread within the group, the spread is enormous. The intragroup variation is always greater than the intergroup variation. Suppose you know about an individual, you meet a person and you want to find out about their opinions. What are French people thinking on this topic? What are Italian people thinking on that topic? Knowing one person's opinion doesn't tell you about the huge spread of a whole nation. And knowing on average what a whole nation does doesn't tell you about what an individual does. The relationship between the individual and the group is highly problematic, and yet, and it's because of the way our language works, we group people together. We've got words like male and female that make it easy for us to group, and imagine that we've given all of the people in this group a label, male, all of the people in this group, label, female. We think that we've grouped like things together because that's the way words work. When you put a word to something, and this is a phenomenon called reification, we think by putting a word to a group that we've created a group that is in some ways homogeneous. We need to be aware that the variation within group is always greater than the variation between groups. We know on average that girls perform better on maths than boys, but if you think that because a particular individual is female, she's more likely to have a higher math score than a particular individual because he's male, that's called the ecological fallacy, that knowing about where they are, which group they are a member of, tells us something about their individual performance. This is, I think, the only secure conclusion that we come to time and time again after studying groups of people, that the relationship between the individual and the group is highly problematic. And yet we time and time again say, oh, I've been to China and I know quite a lot about Chinese culture, and therefore I need to have those things in mind when I'm dealing with this particular friend of mine who is Chinese. I know quite a lot about the way American people think on average, I need to bear those things in mind when I talk about this particular friend of mine who's American. No, that conclusion is wrong. Knowing about the average performance doesn't necessarily tell us anything about the individual performance because of this huge intra-group variation. Think about it in any terms that you like. Are chairs very similar? Well, chairs have something in common, but there's a very wide variety. Are tables very similar? Well, tables have something in common, but they're a very wide spread of things that we call tables. Exactly where the overlap is between things that have 4 legs and a flat surface to sit on and 3 legs or one central pillar that they stand on, lots of different variations. We mustn't be fooled by the fact that we can collect things together and call them a group and apply a label to them. We mustn't be persuaded that there definitely is some organic connection between those people in groups. This, then, is the most important lesson of comparative studies.